we decided that the problem in the '78 loss, now that we had the money fixed, was the candidate, and we didn't want another Bill Fitzgerald, who, as wonderful a person as he was a pro-life Democrat, which didn't exactly work with the coalition. And we needed to figure out somebody else. So we went through, I don't know, a list of a half a dozen people. Broadhead, who was a congressman, Blanchard, who was a congressman, some judge from the east side in Grosse Pointe, who had a bit of a statewide following. And we each decided that we'd go talk to these individuals to decide if they were even interested in running, because what's the point if somebody doesn't want to run? And I got the assignment of going to talk to Blanchard because I was the one who had maintained this personal friendship with him and helped him get elected to Congress. And so my wife and I, over Thanksgiving, invited Jim and his then wife, Paula, to dinner in Troy. Restaurant, it's not there anymore, it's on Big Beaver. And a very nice restaurant, and Jim was in town for the Thanksgiving recess. And I told him that there was a group of people, without identifying exactly who they were, who had influence in the Democratic Party, including me, who thought he'd make a fine candidate for governor, but were interested in understanding if he was interested. And of course, he immediately said he was not interested. He was happy being a congressman, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, think about this, because there's a lot of things that go with being governor that don't go with being a congressman. And I started talking about the governor's mansion in Lansing and on Mackinac Island. And I'll never forget Paula's immediate reaction. She started focusing in on the conversation. She said, well, no, wait a minute, Jim. Listen to what Morley has to say. Maybe there's something to this. And it would mean you wouldn't be away in Washington. We could have a home together. I later learned she wasn't a great cook, and the fact that it came with a chef was another attraction to Paula. And so, because his wife was suddenly saying, hey, you could be governor, and I could be first lady, that he might be interested. So the conversation ended. He said, well, I'd need to see some data, because he knew I was a big polling guy, that would suggest I have a chance, and I'd need to see a groundswell of support. I don't want to step into this and get everybody else who's interested mad. Da-da-da. So I went back to the garden club, so to speak, and told them what he said when they said, okay, I think we got a candidate. Let's get the polling together. We did that. And what can we do to convince him there's a groundswell of support? I said, well, we could create a draft Blanchard committee. Remember, none of us have any official position in the party at that point. Well, what would that look like? Well, we get a bunch of our friends, we tell them it's Blanchard, we give them the signal that labor will come along if Blanchard decides to run, but we don't do labor first. Make sure none of the people in the draft Blanchard committee can even be associated with labor. We had got a wonderful woman named Shirley Gray, who was my PR person back when I was party chairman, to put it all together, figure out the copy for the ads. Some folks contributed some money for some ads in Democratic-oriented publications. And suddenly there was a draft Blanchard committee. And Blanchard was delighted, because then he could respond and say, well, I don't really want to leave my congressional district, but there seems to be a groundswell of support. He ran, other people got out of the primary. Some people were not smart enough to get out of the primary. Labor endorsed him in the primary, which was surprising to everybody, but that had already been decided back when I talked to him. And the rest is history.
But this, in a way, it seems like, if there's kind of a theme here, you become aware that the New Deal coalition is not a foundation for Democrats winning elections and governing.
Correct.
Certainly nationally, right? And in industrial states like
right.
Michigan as well.
Right.
So then you begin to get involved with the movement within the Democratic Party.
Well, get involved in the Democratic Leadership Council. Well, first I convened a group of folks about what we should do about all that, about the memo after Mondale left, and I think memory tells me you were a member of that gathering in my addition to my house out in Troy. But we had been meeting, not necessarily the same players, but I had been convening meetings when I was party chairman, after I was party chairman, of some of the power structure of the Michigan Democratic Party. It's how we actually ended up drafting Blanchard, if you will. But by then, Blanchard's governor. He's been successful in '82. He's going to run again in '86. None of us knew that it would be as easy in a re-election as it turned out to be. And so in '85 and '86, we started talking about what's the alternative approach that would still be democratic. And you were pushing kind of an opportunity society and making it, one of the problems with all of the McGovern influence in the party was this kind of desire to mandate outcomes, to have the government dictate how society should function and therefore make sure it did function that way, instead of having incentives for it to function that way and achieve the same goals differently. And we talked opportunity, responsibility. You and I did a presentation we got active in the Democratic Leadership Council, which gotten active without our help. But after the 1990 election, we did a presentation that I wrote about in the book I wrote with Dudley Buffa about taking control. We did a presentation on opportunity and responsibility, were the key themes that the Democrats could use to win the election in '92. Some guy named Bill Clinton, who was vice chair of the DLC, listened to us, brought us in afterward and said, that's got some potential. And he went off and organized DLC stuff and decided that opportunity and responsibility was too much of a Republican message and that we needed to add the word community to it. And so he went out and built a rival operation inside the party, playing off the kind of Jesse Jackson, old McGovernite wing of the party on opportunity, responsibility, and community. And he was saying those words, I remember being startled by it, in his last campaign appearance in 1992 in Denver, Colorado, in the morning. He got off on a plane, pretty hoarse, hoping to carry Colorado, and lectured the crowd on opportunity, responsibility, and community. So we had some influence on all of that.
But things keep going. The advantage of living long enough is things keep changing. So, and the battle, as I recall, part of what the DLC was trying to do was win back enough white votes for Democrats to be able to win elections.
Suburban voters, white voters, however you care to characterize it.
Right, and of course the Southern governors, the progressive Southern governors, were a great group to think about that with, because they needed to get, what, I remember 35% or so
Clinton,
of the white vote.
Gore, although he was the governor of Tennessee, senator, the fellow in Georgia, Nunn, who was chair of the DLC when Clinton was vice chair when we gave that speech. He wasn't there that day, to his great regret. And he was instead voting against the Gulf of Tonkin resolution or something. No, against the Vietnam War, against the Gulf War resolution. And a whole host of those folks.
Yeah.
That was the basic national Democratic play, was find a Southern governor who can, again, polish off the rough edges, still carry, by being a Democrat, enough northern states and enough votes elsewhere to do fine. None of that is relevant to today's demographics. It's about as relevant as it turned out the New Deal coalition was in the 1970s, but that's what we thought back then.
Then the demographics shift again.
Yeah.
And you become one of the more outspoken people, certainly on the progressive side, about these changing demographics. Those on the conservative side haven't recognized it yet. But
well, it's interesting because in the latest book that I've written with Mike Hayes, we've written 3 all about the influence of this young generation, millennials born between '82 and 2003, who are kind of like the GI generation in terms of generational type, not necessarily in terms of public program, but certainly tolerant, liberal voters, 2/3 for Obama in '08 and 60% in 2012, margin of victory in 2012, voters under 30. They are a heavily minority generation, 40% are non-white, 1 out of 5 have an immigrant parent. So they bring a whole different coalition structure to the Democratic Party. One that is in our newest book, Millennial Majority, puts the Democrats in the same position they were in ironically in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where they have a natural coalition that's a majority coalition. That the only way the other side can now win is the same challenge we were fighting against somewhat without knowledge in the Reagan era, which is to figure out a way, despite the fact that the demographics work against us and the politics work against us,